growth requires more than capital.
Why do we call it the cheat code? Nobody said growth had to be fair.
Revenue solves everything.
Welcome to the cheat code. What was our fastest path to revenue?
We tend to like to do things the hard way.
What's the cheat code? It's giving yourself an unfair advantage over the others.
What is it that really works, and how are we going to grow these organizations?
That's our cheat code.
All right. Welcome back to the Cheat Code Podcast. Today, I am guest hosting with Josh Wagner, who is now back in the podcast seat. Josh, it's been a few weeks.
Yeah, I was busy doing non-podcast things, so I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Well, today we're joined by one of my favorite people, Kevin OMalley. Kevin and I have worked together in a few past businesses, but he previously ran marketing over at Salesloft, CMO at Stax, and now he's doing some fractional CMO work. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me. Really excited to be part of the conversation. I've been following this podcast since day one, and now excited to be on it with you today.
Oh, you're the listener? Wow, that's great.
I am the listener, guys. I mean, when you're dropping people in like Craig Rosenberg and Scott Albro, I'm listening. Count me in.
All right. Well, I'm glad there's one out there. That's good.
Some back to follow, but I'll try.
From what I've heard, it won't be too tough.
Well, Kevin, when we talked to you earlier, I know that you wanted to talk about your cheat code today, and that's putting the right people in the right spots at the right time. And I've had some experience with watching you do this before on many different teams, and excited to kind of dig in here. What does that mean to you? And maybe give a little overview of this cheat code.
Yeah. I love the theme of the podcast, the cheat code, and it really gave me when I was thinking about it, there's a lot of great things out there right now for companies to, find a cheat code on. AI is one of those, right? And so when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about, when I reflect on my experience and all the great times I've had along the way, it's not been about the technology and sort of the smart side of, making good decisions about the business. It's about the people and having amazing people on the team and sharing that journey with those people. And so when I think about cheat code, it's always been about being surrounded by amazing people.
I right place, right time is really interesting to me because, oftentimes you get into an organization and, when Justin and I ran Lead MD, we said that it was a choose your own adventure type of operation, right? Like just because you came in as a consultant, let's say, didn't mean that's what you had to do, but you also had to work your butt off and maybe tell us if there was something different you wanted to do, right? Like we didn't have every role in the world. We're a small company. When you say right place, right time, like how are you evaluating that for people? Like, what are you seeing? What are some of those triggers? Because I find it super fascinating.
Yeah. I've had the honor of being in a lot of different size companies across my 20-year career when I'm getting old. And started with UPS, which is a huge organization, 100 years of culture, shared values across hundreds of thousands of people. And you just learn so much from being in an environment like that. But then you get dropped into a startup of, less than 100 people. And it's like, who are you? Everybody's coming in at different points, coming in with different values, different experiences. And you're trying to meld all those people together to create something different. And I just found it so fascinating going from a large company, UPS, that had so much structure around it, to get brought into small organizations that are still trying to figure it all out. And so, for me, I think it's the right time, right people is really understanding where that company is in terms of their journey and finding people that are a right fit for that moment, that are really going to embrace the chaos, most likely in the growth stage,
right?
And have the right skill set at that time. So I always try to think about that right time, right people, because it's not necessarily the wrong person. It's just maybe not the right time.
I know there's a lot of like differing opinions on this, but you said you started at UPS and then went to the startup, right? And then some people, maybe start a startup and go wind up working at an enterprise. Do you think having that that machine experience, right, for lack of a better term, gave you a bird's eye view of what to do and what not to do when going into the scrappy startup, or was it just inherent, inherent in you. You just knew it.
Yeah, no, it definitely gave me a strong foundation of core values, because UPS, we would have to walk around. You'd have a policy book. It was a pamphlet. You had to have it on you at all times. That was a company policy. And we would start our meetings off with big meetings, not all meetings, but as more monthly meetings. And you would pick a policy out of the policy handbook, read it, and then you'd go around the room and people would share what their perspective of their view of that policy. It's how big UPS was. I think they were like 80 billion at the time. So bringing it down to that sort of core level of humanity just gave me such foundation of, I can take what I've learned here and bring it to companies that are trying to find its way and realizing the importance of values and I'll say policies, but really more values.
It's kind of like this comfortable being uncomfortable idea that I know we've talked about before. What are some of the ways that how do you have that conversation with folks when you try to find the right person at the right time? What kind of things you do to uncover whether it is a fit or not? When it's somebody else is in the middle of their career or they're making a transition, like what are some of the building blocks that you use just to determine some of those next steps?
I think about those three things that we talked a lot about at Salesloft, which was, the person, right? Where were they in their career? What were they looking for? So do they understand where they're at? And do you as a manager understand the fit for the role? And then the company. And so when those three things are aligned, when you're aligned to the company's core values, you are aligned to what the expectations of the role are, where you're super clear what the expectations are. And then you are excited and prepared for that opportunity. I mean, it's magic. But when one of those things are out of whack, that's where, that's where the right person, wrong time starts.
Did you have a good example of that in action? Like, I think especially for early stage founders, right? Which is, who Sean and I are working with all the time. Good candidates will jump off the page, right? Like they'll say the right things. They'll be really dynamic in an interview. You'll feel really good about them, but they may not fit those three criterias. Can you talk about an example where you saw that in action, which is like a super strong on the surface candidate, but maybe didn't fit one of those profiles and it was a no?
Yeah. I mean, there's this guy named Sean Kester.
It's a no for me, dog.
Yeah, it's always tough during the hiring process, and it certainly, which is something I picked up at Salesloft, was they actually had core value interviews, and we had a culture team that would interview people based on core values. And so, core values is the behaviors that you would expect out of your team members, and it was they had ranked position if you found somebody that fit the skill level, and they didn't pass the culture interview, they weren't accepted. And so, so do I have an example of that? Unfortunately, I have too many examples of where it was those situations where it was like, great person, like from boy, can they come in and do the job? They understood the role. They had the experience. Everything was like spot on. They understood, had similar experience with the company size and where we were in the journey, but the core values of where they were and what we were expecting, just, not aligned. And that's where you have to, unfortunately, make those decisions early on, because ultimately it'll get figured out later.
That's tough. I mean, there's quite a handful of ones that you're let down afterwards. So Josh mentioned something earlier, which was how they at Lead MD, whatever people came in, it was kind of your choose your own adventure, right? How you wanted to grow within there. And so, parallel to this point, you're making about right place, right time, and into the right seat. Sometimes that seat can change, right? And we've seen that happen before, and it evolves over time. So maybe I'd love to hear kind of your experience on like when that person you brought in, that it was the right time and it was the right place and it was the right seat, how maybe that changed over time. And it may not even be that they grew within your own team, but it could be that they went to a different team within the organization, but it's still a good fit, right? It just maybe not the fit for that particular seat.
Absolutely. Sunshine Levine, amazing individual. Okay. In the interview process, you talk about alignment, she went through the whole process and she went through an interview with Kyle, reporter who was one of the toughest interviewers out there. And so afterwards, she went through it. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go find out, see how it went. So I sort of head into the office. He's like, one of the best interviews I've ever had. She's going to be special. Right, Sean? I mean, yeah, you were part of the process. And Sunshine, she came in as a product marketing manager.
Yeah, does on my team. Yeah.
That's right. Led by an amazing leader, Sean Kester. But when you think about her growth at Salesloft, she was super curious, super smart, super energetic, just like an ideal team player, right? You just somebody you want to work with. And she, over 3 years, maybe even less, said, I really want to become lead the analyst relations effort. And she went out and built her own role. And, when you're in a fast growing company, you need people like that to be able and to be ready to help the company prepare for when that growth continues, to be ready for that next opportunity. And she's the type of example of somebody who went out and created it, which is amazing.
I love that. Yeah, those are great stories. And there's tons of those, I think, in startups that do well and make it, right? You have those people that help catalyze or be the catalyst for just making that next step forward, which sometimes is the hardest thing to do, right? Like, you know how it is at every phase. It's like, how do we get over the hump? There's always some sort of hump. So I'm curious, not to go backwards, but you talked about the transition from UPS to Salesloft. That can be a shock to the system, right? You go from highly structured, highly corporate, everything's got a rule, there's like you said, there's a handbook you're walking around.
Yeah, I was in my early or late 20s when I made the transition from UPS. I actually went to another tech company a few prior to Salesloft to prepare myself.
Okay, well, even so.
Yeah. But I remember swearing. Swearing was not a thing at UPS. Like,
no, I can't imagine it would be.
Think about swearing. So I go into this other startup and they're dropping F-bombs in meetings. And it's like, I'm like around like, I do declare. And I remember clearly like, oh, as little as that sounds, like, this is different.
Yeah.
And that was a small example of like, all right, this is not as big corporate anymore.
Yeah, when you think about that from like a hiring and bringing people and trying to put people in the right spot perspective, like, can you identify that person's got a little cowboy in them and they can handle that environment? Or if it's just like, man, you're at Oracle, that's where you sold, everything's a playbook, this is how it's done, you're not going to be able to just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. Do you think that's identifiable?
Yeah, it is. Certainly in the interviewing process, you can pick a lot of that up, certainly through examples. And you talk about the Ideal Team Player, which is a great book. Mm-hmm. Are humble, hungry, and smart. And you build your interview process around what you're looking for. And a lot of that comes with questions around experiences. So, name me a time when you saw this or when you had to experience this. Sean Kester, I always say Sean Kester. I always got to say his last name. Sean is one of the best people I've seen do interviews. He really gets to the heart, and I've always admired his interview skills. Sean, maybe you can hone in on some of the examples that you used in the past, because I know you're really good about. He'd come out of interviews and go, "Yeah, I can't believe they did that." I'm like, "You got down to that level in 30 minutes."
Well, we just got out of an interview. I guess I should have shut up and let him take the lead.
Oh yeah, he's good. I mean, he gets in there.
I think top grading. I mean, we had a lot of very smart people at Salesloft that cared very passionately about who we hired and spent an enormous amount of time creating a structure in order to bring on the best people that we possibly could. And it was a strenuous process, but one of the steps in there was this thing called top grading, where you go back chronologically through their entire history, all the way from like how they chose to go to their university or college or whatever they decided to do after high school. And you ask the same set of questions with every kind of new chunk that they had in their career or big decision in order to identify how they made decisions. And what you tried to get at was what motivates them and how do they make decisions. So things that you didn't want to hear necessarily was, I chose that school because my dad went there and got me it. right? Like that doesn't show this drive. Or it's, well, you do want to hear something like, I went there because they had this unique program that I really want to be a part of. And regardless if they ended up using that in their professional career, it's like they had a motivation. They went out there to achieve something. And then how they made a decision to go on each role and et cetera. And throughout that process, you find some really cool things out about people. I mean, the motivations that they have in order to go from one place to another could be as simple as like, I moved and I had to get a new job. I had to be in the office, to I had this unique opportunity to work with a mentor of mine, to, I had to start from scratch and I wanted to change careers completely. And so you start to just like uncover these patterns about people that are really, really interesting. But, it all stems off of the idea that you have a hiring profile based on the core values of your business and what you're trying to achieve and the stage that you're at and all these other factors in there. And you can use that kind of as your template to make sure these people are the right people in the right seats at the right time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you could probably start to learn a little bit about how people mature using that model as well. Because, if you asked me why I chose my college, that would be highly unimpressive and come off as fairly lazy, to be honest with you, compared to, how I matured over time. So I think that is an interesting.
Is you a change man now?
I mean, I think I'm a little more intense than I was then. I was like, oh, I don't have to do anything to get in here, because I went to Arizona State and I went to a private Catholic school here in the Valley that basically, if you graduated, you were guaranteed an in, right? To any of the state schools. So it's like, oh yeah, cool, that sounds good. I'll do that.
Well, Kevin, I started interviews. For when I think about people, I've probably spent more time with the people that I have, and then because once they're on board, you're talking about the growth of a company. You're in a different spot 6 months later, and so you try to ensure you get the right people on the bus. But as you're moving, you start looking around, and you've got a full bus, and you got to make sure you're constantly doing, reevaluating where everybody's at and if they're in the right spot. And so for me, I also think about all the existing people versus just, new people
and how the dynamic would change. And I think this kind of leads into what I was going to ask you next, is like, when there's a negative dynamic introduced into an otherwise positive kind of ecosystem, like how much damage can that do? How quickly, like, how do you remedy that? How do you try to get ahead of that? Because I know you and I both experienced this many different times in our career and while working together, that there's a person that can come into it and change the entire dynamic for very negatively within a team.
One thing that comes to mind is, you, as a leader, as a people leader, you either have the choice of what to build or what you allow. And if you don't make those hard decisions, then you've allowed something that you've made that decision. So as a leader, you're making that decision because you're allowing that behavior to disrupt what could be a very positive experience for other people. So for me personally, I've had a number of times in my career where that hard decision was presented and I didn't make it fast enough. And I wish in retrospect, and you've probably all been there, where it's like, after you make hard decisions to potentially, separate from people, what do you hear from your other team members? Oh, I can't believe it took that long. Oh, I'm not surprised, right? Like, very rarely get somebody, the team go, I'm shocked.
Yeah, that was diamond in the rough.
Yeah, that's right. Very rarely. And so, I'm always trying to get better in that area to make the harder decision faster and help the team versus the individual. And a lot of times helping the individual is letting them go so that they can, it's a better fit for them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm catching on to here is keeping a pulse on the person, because talent is hard to acquire no matter how you look at it, right? So if you get someone in that's good, it's worth your time, even if you're seeing friction, right? Like, it's not all going positively. You just can't seem to figure it out. The startup environment is so dynamic and it's growing so fast. Just because that AE you hired isn't working out as an AE, maybe they are perfect in customer success. They can take that knowledge and pivot somewhere else, and you need to grow that team. Like, I just think that it's so hard to acquire talent if there's a way to pivot.
That's such a great point. And when I think about, we didn't get to say his name yet, but Kyle Porter, the CEO of Salesloft. when he hired me in 2015, I swear to you, I spent the first 6 months, not when I spent time with him, it wasn't about the company. We spent more, he was big on servant leadership and still is. We spent time vested understanding each other about our past, like, going back to like, the life steps type of journeys. And he really intentionally invested into understanding people from the ground up. And that helped solidify the trust that we had for each other, understanding of each other. And man, the whole time I worked for the next 5 years, that's what it was like. And it was really, I call the word intentional, but it was an intentional journey, he was very good about that. And it really helped our relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I'm guessing it wasn't a straight line, right? It probably wasn't just, hey, I came in this role and I just kind of like took the stair stepper up to the next rung of that role. My guess is because you were worthwhile, because you both made the investment in each other, you wound up kind of getting your tentacles into the organization, doing lots of things.
Yeah. Certainly understood what I was capable of, and very much building up from who I was at the core, and investing in how Kevin ticks, and so when you think about investing in people, if you're a people leader and if you don't have energy for that, if that takes away energy from, like, if you're listening to this going, oh my God, that would be so painful, then you're probably not best suited for a people leader role. Like, you've got to have energy for people and seeing investing in that time so that you can make sure that they are the right spot at the right time.
How does this change in the remote environment? How do you achieve this when there's so many organizations that are hybrid or kind of work from wherever?
Yeah. Times are changing there. That's a good question, Shaw. When I think about that, I think about, there's certainly a lot of the same fundamentals exist. Understanding the person, having consistency of structure, doing weekly one-on-ones that you never miss, a formalized one-on-one, not informal one-on-ones. Consistency is big for remote. And then the other one is, there's other things like role clarity, which is something we were big on, where every quarter we are reevaluating someone's performance profile. So in remote, you got to make sure everyone's very clear what's expected of them. And so I think a big part about remote is just being more consistent and repetitive on how you're leading.
How early are you getting really specific around role clarity? Because it seems to me that, you go early stage startup, there's like no role clarity, right? You're doing everything. You're wearing a bunch of hats. What's that inflection point and where it's really necessary?
I would say once the team is at 3, I think for marketing, it's like, all right, doing that. $1 million is when I think about the Salesloft journey of when we had 3 marketers.
Yeah.
And then, because usually when you go from $1 million to 5, you're at least doubling, if not tripling that team. And so, if you think about that core group wearing a lot of hats, well, you got to figure out what hats to take off and keep on, and ensure that they stay motivated and excited about their part. Because there's a great article that I think Sean used to share it around, the Legos.
Yeah, he still does.
Sharing the Legos. Yeah, I love this article. I do reference it for time. It's awesome, and it's just about sharing Legos being your role within a company, and how to not feel bad when you're like, I'm going to now give this role, this my responsibility over to you. Do you remember that article, Sean?
Yeah, it's like Who Took My Legos or something. I forget the name, but the idea is that you've got all these Legos to build stuff with when you're early on in a company, or you're CDO, or the head of a department, and as it grows, you have to give up roles and responsibilities to scale. And it's really difficult because you feel ownership over these things. You might have built this thing up, but you got to give them to somebody else so they can focus on it full time, or you got to go level up as well. And so, it's relevant to anyone as they grow in their career, period. But it's just the idea that you've got to be okay in order to get far and to go far. You've got to enlist these other people and give them these responsibilities that you can't have oversight over which is hard. Very hard.
Yeah, I think you shared it with one of our founders recently, didn't you?
Yeah, that day.
Yeah. And it just,
He's got some go-tos. I've got some go-tos. He's got some go-tos.
we all,
Yeah. But what's cool about it is that, and this is the reason why I love startups, is growth creates opportunity. When there's growth, good things are happening. Even if, some cases, like for my ending at Salesloft, I ended there because the company grew to what they wanted to grow to, and they needed to up level my role, and that sucks for me personally, getting clubbed like a baby seal. But it was as much as it having to let go and change management, endings, beginning, all that fun stuff. It's ultimately still about the company is going to another stage and it needs a different type of leader to help them get to the next stage.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a tough one. That tends to happen with M&A and things like that, right? Like, the person that got you to 10 million isn't necessarily the person to get you to 50 and on up the scale. That's certainly a tough one sometimes.
Another Kyleism. Kyle Porter would always say that you've got to you had to grow faster than your experiences. So in order to be successful and to stick around in a fast-growing organization and not to get layered or not to be outgrown by the organization, you have to learn faster than your experiences, which is incredibly difficult to do, because that means you need a mentor network. You got to create these different channels for you to learn these things, because ultimately everyone's expensible, right? And it's at a certain level within a growing organization. And if you can't figure out how to get there before you've actually experienced getting there, then they'll find someone. And that's just the nature of a fast-growing organization. But it's something that everyone can strive to do. And it's something that a lot of the right people in the right spots at the right times take it upon themselves to try to achieve. Absolutely.
Yeah. I tend to have a little bit of a bias for sales because that's my background. But you mentioned something earlier about being passionate about caring about people. And, there's this, in the sales profession, it's kind of like this, okay, you're an SDR, you're an AE, you're an AE 2, 3, 5, whatever. Then you're a frontline manager then you're a director, a VP, whatever. Yeah. And I think they think it's the only path, right? But individual contributors who are really good, who get put in that, get the tap on the shoulder, and I've been there. Oh, it's time for you to become a director or VP or whatever. Like sometimes it's a nice ego stroke and you're just like, yeah, of course, I'm here for the team. But the people element becomes so critical at that point. Like, you're not selling shit anymore. Like, that's not your primary job. Your primary job is to up level people and spend so much time with them personally, professionally. And I don't think enough people think about that. And to your point earlier.
Great point. Earlier in your career, you're so focused on your individual skills, individual achievement. And you're sort of, if you strive to become a manager, you're probably investing in leadership training and, preparing yourself that moment. But, it's definitely a different, motion. And the Lencioni's, The Advantage, it's an awesome book, that I lean on quite a bit. And they talk about, the smart side and the healthy side. And you think about the smart side, it's kind of like sales, and the smart side would be like being an awesome closer or understanding what it took to close. The organizational health side is one that's a little more messier. It's where the people are, and it's two different muscles that you really got to get right as a company and as a leader within the company.
Yeah. I just think the model of, let's turn our best seller into a leader is not a recipe for success, right? Like, they're typically more selfish, right? Like if they're that dominant as an IC, they're probably pretty damn selfish, and that's okay.
Yeah. That's a challenge. I don't know where you sort of find, because they do also have all the characteristics that you want to see in others.
Correct.
Right. I mean, they want them to go create 5 of you, go find 5 and do the same. It's definitely different.
But it's also kind of like when Wayne Gretzky coached the Coyotes for a minute. Like, What, you just can't do that amazing thing that I did that I did in my sleep. You know what I mean? Well, yeah, you were the greatest hockey player ever. Yeah, no, I can't do that. Right? Well, why not?
Right.
You know what I mean? I kind of feel like that effect happens sometimes.
Yeah, there was that book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it's the idea that all the skills that you've got to be a wonderful top individual contributor will not work at all when you become to the other side and try to lead. It's a great book, but it's about that exact topic. Kevin, I have a question for you. So now that you've gone from leading these internal teams and being for the majority of your career and having gone into more of this fractional CMO work, how does what we've just talked about differ from what you're doing with the internal teams, and how are you doing the assessments there, and how are you interacting with these teams on a regular basis?
Yeah, with the fractional work's been pretty neat, because you sort of get brought into different types of situations and companies, and at different growth stages, and I'd say it tends to be a lot more tactical. So I'm coming in and looking at skill gaps. Is a lot of times the CEO is not sure if they have the right leader, or they're trying to assess the right leader, sort of bridge some of the gaps there. But then it's also go down the next level is figuring out what's actually needed for that team to be successful. So a lot of it has to do with skill assessment initially, but then ultimately it gets into getting back to the core values and all the things that we talked about. But I will say one thing that has been helpful is the 9 box. If you're familiar with that, but it's just looking at how to understand where people are in terms of their performance and their potential. And, it's a good way of just aligning with the management of, is this person got high potential, but they're for whatever reason not performing up to that potential. So the 9 box method is a great way to sort of figure out where everybody is, and help figure out a coaching plan or a plan to help them move up or out.
Very cool.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, if people want to get in touch with you and learn some more, maybe get hold of some of these resources you spoke about, what's the best way?
The best way is LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn or my email, which I'm sure that I can provide.
Big influencer.
Well, Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. Really enjoyed the conversation and catching up. Yeah, for sure. And any last words, last pieces of advice?
My last words is, if you could do anything for the people is really to bring focus and energy to their lives and to their roles within the company. So like I said, if you've got to really have energy to really be the leader for people, and I think a lot of what we talked about today can help you get in that move in the right direction.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kevin.